Dubai's dark side is everything wrong with modern society but wearing a luxury suit. Money worship, image addiction, control is sold as success. Online, it looks like the upgraded human life. Towers, pools, supercars, and that smug promise that rules are simple if you've made it, but here's where it gets worse. A city this perfect isn't found. It's built to impress, built to attract rich outsiders, built to keep the messy parts out of frame, and once you see the split, you can't unsee it. So let's expose the system behind the shine, and why the rest of the world keeps moving in the same direction. The two stories everyone tells. You do not have to scroll far to see the contradiction. One set of videos treats the city like a luxury showroom. Models posing on balconies, men filming steering wheels, celebrities praising the latest mega project as if they found paradise by accident. Another set treats the same place like a warning label, listing human rights abuses, harsh policing, and the reasons you should never move there. Both sides speak with total certainty, and both sides sound like they are describing a different planet. The glossy version always points the lens upward. Everything is new, reflective, and clean. Skyscrapers rise like trophies. Artificial beaches look perfect because they were engineered to look perfect. You see couples in designer outfits, shopping bags, rooftop pools, and a kind of confidence that comes from never worrying about rent or paperwork. The message is not subtle. Life can be frictionless if you choose the right city. The darker version looks sideways at what the frame avoids. It notices how controlled the public space feels, how quickly trouble disappears, how little room there is for being ordinary. It notices that the city can feel rock solid while still being built on sand, a mirage made concrete. It notices that the rules can be strict in ways that surprise visitors who assume every global city plays by. The same legal grammar. Here is the reconciliation that makes people angry because it refuses to pick a team. If you arrive with money, status, and a passport that makes travel easy, the glossy story can be true enough to feel like truth. If you arrive without leverage, or if your visa depends on one employer, the darker story starts to explain more of what you see. In other words, both camps are right because the place is tiered by design. And once you accept that, the next question becomes obvious. Who designed it that way and for what purpose? The shine has a logic. The dream is a business model. The first layer is incentive. For the people who can choose a base, the city offers a simple deal. Keep more of what you earn. Spend it in a place built to flatter you and surround yourself with others who made the same calculation. In the United Arab Emirates, most individuals do not pay a personal income tax. That single policy does not merely attract wealth, it concentrates it, and it reshapes the culture around it. You feel that concentration in the built environment. This is a place designed for luxury, the way an airport is designed for throughput. Car dealerships sit like galleries. Malls feel like climate-controlled cities. Towers are branded like products because real estate here is not only shelter, it is a financial instrument and a status signal. Even the casual walk becomes a marketing tour. Polished lobbies, curated fountains, and 1,000 cues that whisper you have arrived somewhere premium. That is why the influencer economy fits so perfectly. When celebrities and online personalities are paid to praise a new island, a new tower, a new impossible proposal, they are not only selling tourism, they are selling confidence. They are telling investors that the story is still going up. They are telling entrepreneurs that the network is here. They are telling outsiders that the future has a zip code. Tourism is part of the calculus. The city frequently ranks among the top 10 most visited urban destinations in global tourism lists, and the leadership has been explicit about wanting to become a capital of leisure, business events, and luxury travel. The spending behind that ambition is vast. Some commentators throw around the word trillions, but even cautious accounting lands in many billions. Airports, ports, roads, towers, islands, and constant reinvestment in image. This is also why comparisons to places like Los Angeles get thrown around. The old dream promised social mobility, creativity, and a chance to build a life. The new dream promises something simpler: optimization, lower taxes, easier hiring, faster logistics, a large community of similarly motivated expatriates. For a certain class of people, the pitch is irresistible and the city becomes a base for business, networking, and a lifestyle that photographs well. But here is the catch. When a city sells an image, it also attracts people who are willing to do almost anything to stay close to that image. And once that happens, opportunity and exploitation start to overlap in ways that are hard to separate. If this is hitting a nerve, subscribe now because we go even deeper on stories like this. And comment below, is Dubai the exception or the clearest preview of where modern society is heading? The price of being seen. The moment you step behind the glossy story, the information gets strange. Some topics are simply absent from mainstream conversation. Others show up as whispers, screenshots, and stories told with nervous laughter. The reason is not mysterious. In a society where reputation can be everything, where laws about public morality can be strict, and where powerful people have an interest in keeping the brand clean, the cost of speaking can be high. This is where the internet fills the gaps with a rumor economy. You will hear claims about wealthy patrons approaching aspiring models and influencers with offers that sound like a lottery ticket, flights, hotels, luxury stays, and five-digit sums of money. In exchange, behavior that many people would never publicly admit to. The details are often said to be protected by non-disclosure agreements, and the stories tend to spread through anonymous accounts because embarrassment does the censoring long before any formal reporting can follow. Some accounts include specific figures, like $50,000 for a private party at a secluded mansion or $7,000 for a single appearance. Treat those numbers as what they are, claims circulating in a low transparency environment. The point is not to treat every screenshot as evidence. The point is to recognize what kind of marketplace forms when status becomes a product and vulnerable outsiders compete for attention. It is important to be disciplined here. Some of the most extreme versions of these stories are impossible to verify and too sensational to treat as fact. But dismissing the entire phenomenon as fiction also misses the mechanism. When there is a large wealth gap, and when outsiders have limited protection, predatory dynamics are not a shocking twist. They are a predictable feature. And when the brand depends on attracting young people and money, suppressing scandal becomes part of the growth strategy. So treat the most explicit allegations as rumors unless documented. But do not ignore the pattern. Aspiration can be weaponized. Young, hopeful people arrive believing the city is a shortcut to success. Some find genuine opportunity. Others discover that the ladder is crowded and that the people at the top can set the price of entry. To understand why this particular city leans so hard into image, you have to understand the timer under the whole project. Urgency builds monuments, a race against time. The wealth that powered the transformation came from oil, and oil comes with an expiry date written into geology and geopolitics. Even without knowing the exact year any field declines, the direction is clear. Relying on one resource is a risk. Demand can shift, prices can crash, technology can change. The world can decide that it cannot keep burning the same fuel at the same scale. So the question becomes, what happens after the easy money? The answer in this case was diversification at speed. Finance, trade, tourism, and real estate became the new pillars. But diversification is not only an economic plan, it is also a psychological one. You have to persuade the world that the boom is permanent, that the capital is safe, that the brand is irresistible, and that the skyline is proof. If you do not, the money goes elsewhere. That is why spectacle becomes strategy. A building is no longer just a building, it is a headline. An island is no longer just land, it is a logo. A mega project is not only a development, it is a story that attracts the next round of money. The city becomes a feedback loop. Attention brings investment. Investment builds spectacle. Spectacle brings more attention. History has seen versions of this. When the Mongol Empire expanded, it pulled wealth, scholars, craftsmen, and prestige into its capital. Karakoram swelled quickly, displaying power through palaces and imported talent. When the empire fragmented, the capital lost its engine. Another example often cited is Samarkand. Once a glittering center of empire, now a shadow of its peak power, sudden wealth can build a city fast, and it can also leave it fragile once the engine shifts. The difference here is material. Old capitals often left stone monuments that could endure neglect. This modern city is made of steel, concrete, and glass. Those materials can last, but only with maintenance, and maintenance is a permanent cost. Heat, sand, and salt air do not forgive vanity. A mirage can look permanent while still being dependent on constant intervention. The urgency explains the gamble. Now we need to see how the gamble began. Before the skyline, there was a creek, from fishing village to global stage. The early story is not futuristic at all. It is practical. Long before luxury towers, daily life revolved around fishing, trading, and pearl diving. The settlement was small, connected to the Gulf, and shaped by the rhythms of work rather than the rhythms of branding. That older identity still survives in fragments, but you have to look for it. Geopolitics widened the horizon. For decades, the region sat under a British protectorate, a relationship that lasted until 1971. That influence shaped early political arrangements and trade links, and it placed the settlement inside a wider international network. Around the same period, oil discoveries changed what was possible. The early use of that new wealth was, by many accounts, strategic. Infrastructure was modernized. Roads, schools, hospitals, and a modern port arrived. The leadership knew the oil money had to be turned into something more durable. So the city began, positioning itself as a hub for finance, trade, tourism, and real estate. Then came the era of deliberate attention-seeking. Projects were built not only to function, but to stand out. The Burj Khalifa, artificial islands, and a portfolio of architectural statements designed to carve the city's name into global imagination. The ambition was clear: to shift from humble past to a future framed as boundless possibility. But there was a hard constraint. You cannot build that fast with a small local population. Foreign investors were not going to pour concrete. The city needed labor, and it needed it quickly. That decision created the real foundation beneath the glitter. Now we enter the part of the story the postcards never show. The miracle runs on borrowed hands, the labor engine under the marble. The first clue is the morning movement. Before the city wakes for brunch and boardrooms, buses move in steady lines, service corridors fill, construction sites begin to hum. The people who maintain the shine are already working while the skyline is still a silhouette. A very large share of people here are migrants. You can hear it in the languages on the street and see it in the uniforms that keep the city running. Only after that do you learn how extreme the demographics are. In the United Arab Emirates, non-citizens make up the overwhelming majority, with many estimates placing them around 9/10 of the total population. Many come from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, the Philippines, and multiple African countries. Migration itself is not the scandal. The scandal is what happens when migration is organized through vulnerability. Recruitment is where the risk often begins. Workers are promised wages, accommodation, and a chance to support families at home. Recruiters may charge fees for visas and travel. The amounts vary by corridor, but the mechanism matters more than the number. Debt reduces options. If you arrive owing money, you cannot easily walk away. Then there is the sponsorship structure, often discussed under the term kafala. When residency and employment are tied to an employer, dependency increases. In such systems, critics argue, workers may find it difficult to change jobs or exit abusive situations. Passport confiscation has been widely reported in the region, even when laws formally prohibit it. Housing is frequently described as labor camps or crowded accommodation far from the glamorous center, with limited privacy and poor sanitation. Wages can be reduced from what was promised. Payments can be delayed. Some documentary interviews describe a worker being owed 10 months of salary, unable to return home empty-handed while family members waited for money. Others describe medical costs turning into deductions, with the majority of a wage taken to repay treatment. These are individual accounts, not universal statistics, but they show the kind of power imbalance that turns a job abroad into a trap. There is also a policy detail that matters. There is no single nationwide minimum wage covering most private sector migrant workers. That absence does not automatically equal abuse, but it weakens the floor under negotiations, especially for people with debt and limited mobility. During the coronavirus disease pandemic, authorities announced that companies had to provide food and shelter, but even well-intentioned rules can fail when enforcement is weak and workers fear retaliation. The city's safety and polish depend on this invisible workforce, which brings us to a grim question. What exactly were all these people building? And did the unglamorous systems keep pace with the glamorous symbols? Even the tallest tower needs sewage, monuments, maintenance, and legal fear. A tower can be a triumph and an indictment in the same silhouette. The Burj Khalifa is a genuine engineering achievement, and it anchors the city's brand as a place where anything can be built. But the deeper story of any mega project is not only the height, it is the infrastructure beneath it and the conditions under which it was made. Stories of labor abuses during major construction projects have circulated for years, and they are difficult to verify in every detail. What is easier to verify is the structural vulnerability. A workforce made dependent through sponsorship, working in extreme heat, often with limited ability to organize or complain. The monument becomes a symbol not just of ambition, but of the terms of that ambition. Then there is the viral story about sewage trucks. Videos circulated showing long lines of waste tankers, feeding a narrative that the city built the tallest tower in the world but forgot the plumbing. Online retellings are often simplified or exaggerated, but the broader point is credible in any fast-growing city. Sewage capacity does not scale as quickly as real estate marketing. Plans for major upgrades have been publicly discussed for years, including deep tunnel systems, intended to expand capacity and modernize waste handling, with completion targets often discussed around 2025. The same applies to everything that does not photograph: drainage, long-term housing, labor protections, and dispute resolution. Glamour scales fast, systems scale slowly. A city optimized for spectacle will always be tempted to build the next headline before finishing the boring work. Now add the legal environment. Many visitors describe the city as extremely safe. People tell anecdotes about leaving a bag in public and returning later to find it untouched, because theft carries harsh penalties and social fear of enforcement is high. That deterrence is real, and it is part of the appeal for tourists and elites who are tired of disorder elsewhere. It is why some controversial internet personalities present the city as a haven where you can wear a luxury watch on a beach without worry. But that strictness cuts both ways. Cases have been reported of visitors facing severe sentences for items containing cannabidiol, a substance treated very differently across jurisdictions and often misunderstood by travelers. Another widely shared case involved a visitor detained after an incident at an airport that elsewhere might have been handled as a minor dispute. These stories have legal complexity and retellings can be incomplete, but the lesson is practical. In a tightly controlled legal environment, the margin for misunderstanding can be razor thin, and the consequences can be life-changing. Here is the deeper contradiction. The system can be draconian on individual missteps while being lenient toward institutional exploitation that benefits power. Petty crimes are deterred. Wage theft and recruitment abuse can persist. Safety for the visible can coexist with vulnerability for the invisible. If that sounds like modern society in miniature, what's coming next makes it physical. To reshape nature is to reveal priorities. Artificial, islands, endless sand, and dead trees. From above, the coastline looks like branding. Not natural curves, but designed shapes that can be recognized instantly. A palm, a map, an archipelago meant to be read like a logo. These projects are promoted as engineering miracles, and in a technical sense, they are. But they are also a story about extraction. It surprises many people to learn that desert sand is not always suitable for building islands. Underwater, the wrong grain shape and size can shift too easily. So the sand was dredged from the sea floor, moved in enormous volumes to sculpt new land. Estimates commonly cite roughly 94 million cubic meters of sand for the Palm Jumeirah alone. The number is so large it becomes abstract, but the consequences are concrete. Dredging disrupts habitats, increases water turbidity, alters currents, and reshapes shorelines in ways that can take decades to stabilize. The Palm created roughly 40 kilometers of new shoreline, lined with hotels and mansions. It is a playground for the ultra-wealthy, and it is also a maintenance obligation. Artificial coastlines do not stay put without constant reinforcement. Erosion and subsidence are ongoing risks, and long-term viability depends on continuous investment. The World Islands project revealed another side of the gamble. Many plots remained unfinished or unused for years, and building a functioning community on scattered artificial islands is far harder than selling the idea of it. Then there are the proposals that feel like satire until you remember the city's incentive structure. A moon resort concept has been discussed publicly, described as a massive orb around 200 meters across with luxury hotels and experiences inside, priced in the billions. It may never be built, but even as a proposal, it illustrates the cultural logic. When spectacle is the product, the next spectacle must be bigger, stranger, and more shareable than the last. Nature, in this logic, becomes decoration. Greenery is sparse because water is expensive, and the climate is unforgiving. There was a widely discussed plan announced around 2010 to grow and transplant 1 million desert trees to soften the city. Land on the order of 130,000 square meters was reportedly dedicated to nurseries. Later accounts described the effort collapsing as resources were diverted to newer projects. Workers were restricted from the site, and by 2020, more than 4/5 of the trees were said to have died. Even if the exact fraction shifts by source, the message is the same. Long-term stewardship loses to short-term spectacle. At this stage, it is tempting to say, that is simply how this city is. But that conclusion lets the system off the hook. The more interesting question is whether it had to be this way. To see what is choice and what is destiny, you need a mirror. The comparison that breaks the excuse. There is another place, shaped by trade, global finance, and migration, that often gets compared to this one. It rose from modest origins, was influenced by British systems, and became a hub by embracing international business. It is also strict about order and safety, which makes the comparison sharper, not softer. The key difference is what it chose to make famous. Instead of staking its identity on headline monuments, it became known for planning, public transport that works with choreographed precision, greenery integrated into the city rather than pasted on as decoration, land use disciplined by long-term goals. The brand is not a single tallest object, but a coherent system that keeps daily life predictable. The clearest divergence is how the city treats the people who build and service it. No society is perfect, and migrant workers face risks anywhere power is unequal. But Singapore has implemented policies aimed at improving labor standards and upward mobility, including the progressive wage model, which links pay to skills and progression in certain sectors. It also built a culture of training through programs like Skills Future, signaling that workers are not disposable inputs, but a workforce that can be upgraded, protected, and compensated through clearer pathways. There are also more formal avenues for dispute resolution and a different relationship to public discourse. Even if expression operates within boundaries, there is more room for civic feedback than in a monarchy where dissent is tightly controlled and voices can be pushed out of public space. The contrast matters because it removes the excuse of inevitability. A city can be strict and still invest in institutions. A city can rely on migrants and still build protections that reduce dependency. This comparison also exposes a harder truth from the source material. In the desert model, social mobility can feel like an illusion. You either arrive with money or you do not. For elites and tax exiles, the city can be a paradise. For the workers who build it, the ladder can be effectively closed, not by lack of ambition, but by lack of rights and leverage. And that is why the city can feel like a case study in what modern society keeps rewarding. A small group builds vanity projects, millions do the work, the glossy images flood the world. The inconvenient stories are pushed to the margins. If the wider world keeps paying for the mirage can last. If the world stops paying, the question is not whether the glass will still shine. It is whether the system underneath can stand without constant attention. Once you see that bargain clearly, you start noticing it everywhere. In the end, the unsettling part is not a skyline or a scandal. It is the incentive loop. When a place is built to impress mobile wealth, it must keep performing, keep expanding, and keep smoothing over whatever does not fit the brand. That can hold for a long time, especially when money is flowing and enforcement is strict. Dubai's dark side isn't just about one city, it's a mirror of what modern society keeps rewarding. So I want to hear from you. Is Dubai a warning or the future everyone's quietly choosing? Drop your take in the comments. I read them all. And if you want more deep dives that cut through the glossy headlines, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.